There is a sound that never leaves us. It is not the sound of the world, but the sound of our own conscience, the echo of mistakes we replay, the voices of regret that whisper when the night is quiet. Forgiveness is a word spoken often, yet understood rarely. We imagine it as an act of generosity toward others, but what is often forgotten is that the most relentless prison is the one we build inside ourselves. To forgive another may free them, but to forgive oneself, that is to unlock the cell where we have been keeping our own soul. The tragedy is not that we fail or hurt or fall short. The tragedy is that we keep punishing ourselves for being human, and in this quiet punishment, life begins to shrink. Joy becomes suspicious, peace feels undeserved, love is seen as a debt we can never repay. So we walk through life carrying a shadow, one made not of the past itself, but of our refusal to let the past go. This is where forgiveness begins, not as a transaction, not as a bargain with God, or morality, or society, but as a recognition that the story has already been written, and that the only thing left is whether we will continue dragging it with us. To forgive is not to erase. It is not to excuse. It is to finally accept that nothing could have happened other than what did. The world does not replay yesterday. Only the mind does. And so, the question is not whether forgiveness is possible. The question is whether we will allow ourselves the freedom to step out of the cage we have lived in all along. Forgive yourself. Forgive the world. Not because they deserve it, but because you deserve to be free. The invisible weight of guilt. He walks through the day as if carrying nothing. To the eyes of the world he looks whole, composed, functional. But beneath that still exterior, there is a heaviness pressing down on every step. It is not visible in the body. It is not spoken in words. It is the invisible weight of guilt. Guilt is a peculiar companion. It does not scream. It does not rage. It lingers, softly, like a shadow that follows without asking permission. And no matter how bright the sunlight, the shadow remains. In the quiet of the night, when distractions fall away, the mind begins its trial. It replays scenes of the past, not once, but again and again, as if repetition could change the ending. The heart pleads for mercy, but the mind insists on punishment. Every mistake becomes eternal. Every regret becomes a life sentence, and yet no one else may even notice. The world moves on, people forget, situations dissolve into memory, but within, the self remains chained. He punishes himself long after the punishment was needed, if it was ever needed at all. This is the paradox of guilt. It convinces us that we are being moral, responsible, even noble by holding on to it. We imagine that to forgive ourselves would be careless, arrogant, or weak. So we clutch the guilt tightly as though it were evidence of our goodness. But in truth, guilt is not proof of virtue. It is simply the refusal to release a ghost. And what is the cost of carrying this ghost? Joy becomes shallow. Relationships become fragile. Every opportunity for love is met with suspicion, as if happiness must be earned by enduring enough suffering first. The guilt whispers, "You are not worthy. You must do more. You must repent longer." But the voice never says when enough will finally be enough. The tragedy is not that mistakes were made. The tragedy is that a human being, already fragile, condemns himself to a punishment with no end. Forgiveness begins here, with the recognition that guilt is not the same as responsibility. Responsibility means to learn, to change, to move forward. Guilt is simply the refusal to let learning do its work. It is the endless repetition of a lesson already understood. And so the first step is to see the invisible weight for what it is. Not a sign of strength, not a sign of love, but a silent chain, dragging life into the past. The question is whether he will continue carrying it, or whether he will finally dare to set it down. The circle of self-criticism. The mind is a clever architect. When it cannot forgive, it builds a courtroom. And in that courtroom, the self is both the judge and the accused. The trial never ends. Every day, new evidence is presented. Every night, the verdict is repeated. Guilty, always guilty. This circle of self-criticism is one of the most exhausting prisons a person can live in. It begins with a thought, I should have known better. Then comes another, I always ruin things. Soon a flood, I'm not good enough, I'll never change, I don't deserve peace. Each phrase is small, but together they form a cycle, a wheel that spins endlessly, grinding the spirit down. And the cruelest part is that the one who condemns is the same one who suffers the punishment. There is no outside enemy, only the self, divided against itself. He tries to escape. He distracts himself with work, with noise, with endless busyness. But the voice waits patiently in the silence. No matter how far he runs, the critic is already inside, watching, ready to speak. Self-criticism pretends to be helpful. It disguises itself as discipline, responsibility, even morality. But in truth, it is nothing more than self-sabotage wearing a mask. For discipline corrects and moves forward. Criticism punishes and keeps him stuck. And here lies the secret. The voice of self-criticism is never satisfied. No achievement silences it for long. No apology is ever enough. The moment he thinks he has atoned, the critic finds another flaw, another reason to continue the trial. So he spends his life circling the same point, never free, never at rest. This is why so many souls look outward for peace, but find none. For how can the world offer kindness if one's own mind refuses to offer even a moment of mercy? The circle must be broken, not by fighting the critic, for resistance only fuels its power, but by noticing it for what it is, a habit, not a truth, a pattern, not a prophecy. Forgiveness, in this sense, is not dramatic. It is quiet. It is the simple act of saying, I hear you, but I no longer believe you. And slowly, the circle loosens. The courtroom grows empty, and silence returns, not as a punishment, but as peace. Forgiveness as liberation, not excuse. When people hear the word forgiveness, many recoil. They imagine it as weakness. They imagine it as permission, as if to forgive means to excuse the harm done. But forgiveness is not an eraser. It does not rewrite the past. It does not deny the wound. Forgiveness is something else entirely. It is the recognition that the chains we carry do not bind the other. They bind us. The resentment, the bitterness, the endless retelling of the story, all of it poisons the one who holds it. And so forgiveness is not a gift to another. It is the release of the poison within. To forgive is not to say what you did was right. It is to say, I will not carry your actions any longer. It is not a denial of responsibility. It is the acceptance that continuing to rehearse the wound only multiplies the suffering. This is why forgiveness is liberation. It opens the door to life again. It does not change the past. It changes the relationship to the past. And in that shift, a strange freedom arrives. One no longer lives as the custodian of old injuries, but as a witness to lessons learned. Still, the mind resists. It insists, if I forgive, they win. If I forgive, it means I was weak. But this is the trick of pride. In truth, it takes far greater strength to let go than to cling. Anger is easy, resentment is effortless. But forgiveness, true forgiveness, is the courage to release the story of being a victim and to step back into the flow of life. The liberation is subtle. It comes first as a softening in the chest, a loosening in the stomach. It comes in moments when one realizes that the person or the mistake no longer occupies every corner of thought. It comes as space, as breath, as an unexpected peace. And perhaps this is why forgiveness is so misunderstood, because it does not arrive with a trumpet or a grand declaration. It arrives in silence. It arrives like a window opened in a room long closed. He may ask himself now, is there a grudge, a memory, a wound I still carry? And if so, what would life feel like if it were finally set down? If these words are touching something inside you, let them stay for a moment. And if you feel called to continue exploring this journey of freedom and inner release, consider subscribing, not as a duty, but as a gesture, to remind yourself to return here whenever you need the reminder to let go, forgiving the world to live in peace. The world is not gentle. It stumbles, it collides, it disappoints. Every day small betrayals unfold, promises unkept, words misunderstood, moments lost to chance. And in the larger story, history itself seems to wound us, wars, injustices, losses that appear senseless. It is tempting to believe the world owes us something better, that if people had been wiser, kinder, or more attentive, life would have unfolded in a more merciful way. And yet the truth is colder and quieter. The world has never promised fairness. It only promises life, and even that without guarantee of length or comfort. So the heart hardens. He blames the world. He blames humanity. He blames circumstance, chance, and fate. Every misfortune becomes evidence of betrayal, every disappointment, proof that life itself cannot be trusted. But here lies the hidden wound. When he holds the world guilty, he must carry the sentence himself, for the world cannot feel his anger. It will not appear in court, nor apologize in shame. The world simply continues, sun rising, rain falling, children laughing, while he remains locked in his anger, convinced that life has conspired against him. To forgive the world is not to ignore its pain. It is not to pretend that cruelty, ignorance, or indifference are illusions. It is to accept that life, in its vast unfolding, cannot be controlled, cannot be tamed, cannot be bent to the fragile expectations of one human heart. Forgiving the world means loosening the grip on the question, why? Why did this happen? Why was I treated this way? Why must suffering exist at all? Such questions echo endlessly, but they lead nowhere. The world offers no explanation. It only offers what is, and so forgiveness, in this sense, is surrender, not defeat, but release. It is the recognition that the bitterness he carries toward life itself is only another chain around his neck. In forgiving the world, he discovers something unexpected, a quiet alignment with reality as it is. No longer demanding that life change, he begins to see its rawness, its unpredictability, even its cruelty as part of the vast mystery. And within that mystery, peace emerges. Not from control, but from acceptance. The world remains imperfect, perhaps even unjust, but within him, the war begins to end. And in that ending, the possibility of living, not as a victim of life, but as a participant in it, finally begins. The illusion of control. From the moment he was a child, he was told that life could be managed, that if he tried hard enough, studied enough, behaved well enough, he could bend reality to his will. And for a while, it seemed true. Effort brought reward, choices shaped outcomes. The illusion of control was comforting, even intoxicating. But then life began to fracture. Plans dissolved. Accidents occurred, people left without explanation. Illness struck, doors closed, paths vanished. The harder he tried to command life, the more life revealed its indifference. This is where resentment often takes root. For beneath every grudge, there is a hidden belief. The world should have obeyed me. Things should have gone differently. We rage not only against others, but against the very fabric of existence, because it did not conform to our design. Yet the truth, though uncomfortable, is simple. Control was never ours to begin with. We can guide, we can influence, we can prepare, but the final unfolding has always belonged to the mystery itself. The river flows where it will, no matter how tightly we clutch the steering oar. When he sees this clearly, forgiveness begins to look different. It is no longer about condoning mistakes or excusing cruelty. It is about recognizing that much of what we suffer was never truly in our hands. And how could we hold life guilty for being what it is? Vast, unpredictable, untamable. The illusion of control dissolves slowly. At first it feels like loss, even despair. But then a quiet freedom emerges. If he is not in control, then he is also not ultimately to blame for every misstep, every fracture, every unfulfilled dream. He becomes lighter, not heavier. Forgiveness here is not directed at a person, but at the very structure of existence. It is the soft bow before what is greater than him, a surrender not of weakness, but of wisdom. He learns to flow, to release the clenched fist, to let the river carry him instead of drowning in resistance. If you've listened this far, perhaps part of you already senses this truth, that control is a story we tell ourselves, and forgiveness begins when that story loosens its grip. If this reflection has opened something within you, consider leaving a comment below. Share where in your own life you've struggled most with letting go of control. Your words may give another person the courage to soften, to release, to forgive. The inner reconciliation. There comes a moment, quiet and almost invisible, when the war within grows unbearable. Not the war with others, not even the war with the world, but the war with oneself. The endless trial of guilt, the rehearsed arguments of anger, the stories of control, all of it becomes too heavy to carry. He realizes that he has been split in two, one part of him longing for peace, another part convinced he does not deserve it. One part ready to move forward, another chained to the past. This fracture is the deepest wound of all. Reconciliation does not happen in a single flash. It arrives slowly, like dawn seeping into the night. It begins with the smallest act, acknowledging that both parts of him are human, the one who made mistakes, the one who longs to forgive. They are not enemies, they are fragments of the same soul. So he sits quietly, perhaps for the first time, without judgment. He listens to his own heart, not to condemn it, but to finally hear what it has been asking all along. And what it asks is not punishment, not perfection, but tenderness. It asks to be allowed to exist as it is, flawed, vulnerable, alive. This is reconciliation, the soft embrace of one's own imperfection. It is the recognition that self-forgiveness is not indulgence. It is the soil in which growth can finally take root. For no tree grows strong in poisoned ground, and no spirit thrives under constant accusation. As the inner war softens, he discovers a surprising silence, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of alignment. The critic begins to fade, the anger loses its fuel, the past releases its grip. In their place arises a deeper presence, one that does not need to defend or explain. Reconciliation is not dramatic. It is not a grand victory. It is a return to the self he has been avoiding. A return to the simple truth that he, like all others, is a fragment of a vast whole, doing the best he can with the life given. And in this return, forgiveness ceases to be an abstract idea. It becomes the ground on which he stands. No longer divided against himself, he begins to walk lighter, with a clarity that does not erase the past, but weaves it into a story he can finally live with. The silence after forgiveness. Forgiveness is often imagined as a loud moment, a dramatic declaration, a sudden transformation where anger melts away and light floods the heart. But the truth is far quieter. After forgiveness, what remains is not fireworks, but silence. Not a silence of emptiness, but of release. The kind of silence that fills a room after the storm has passed, when the air is still heavy yet strangely clear. He notices it not in grand gestures, but in small moments. He remembers the face of someone who once caused him pain and finds no sharpness in his chest. He recalls his own mistakes and feels no need to reopen the trial. The silence is not forgetting, it is remembering without chains. This silence is unsettling at first. For so long, resentment and guilt have been constant companions. Without them, there is space, too much space. And into that space, life begins to flow again. Colors seem brighter, laughter feels lighter, and time itself no longer drags under the weight of old stories. Here is the secret. Forgiveness is not the end of something, but the beginning of life lived without armor. It is not the denial of pain, but the refusal to let pain define every breath that follows. It is a quiet courage, an invitation to walk forward unburdened. In the silence after forgiveness, he discovers himself again. Not the version he thought he had to be, nor the one trapped in memory, but the self that exists right here, right now. Whole, human, imperfect, and yet free. This silence does not shout. It does not demand recognition. It simply waits like open ground, ready to grow whatever seeds are planted next. If you've stayed with these words until now, let the silence speak to you too. Not the silence of absence, but of possibility. And if you wish to keep returning to this kind of reflection, these quiet explorations of freedom and self-discovery, consider subscribing. Not as a transaction, but as a way of saying to yourself, I will remember to return here, to pause, and to listen. For forgiveness is not something heard once. It is a rhythm, a practice, a return. And each time you return, the silence grows deeper and the freedom more real. The quiet freedom of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not a single act. It is not a ceremony nor a ritual completed once and for all. It is a way of living, a rhythm that continues as long as we draw breath. Throughout life, he will stumble again. Others will wound him and he will wound others. The cycle of hurt and regret does not vanish with one moment of clarity. But what changes is his relationship to it. He no longer sees mistakes as permanent stains, but as lessons carried in the folds of time. He no longer sees the world as an enemy to resist, but as a mystery too vast to control. And within himself, he no longer needs to fight a war that was never meant to be won. Forgiveness, then, is not about forgetting. It is not about erasing the past or pretending it was different. It is about remembering differently, without the chains, without the courtroom, without the endless punishment. When he forgives himself, he learns to move lightly. When he forgives the world, he learns to live without bitterness. And when both are released, he discovers something he had been seeking all along, often without knowing. Peace. Not peace as a grand achievement. Not peace as perfection, but peace as presence. The peace of being here in this moment, unburdened. In this way, forgiveness is not weakness. It is the greatest act of strength. It is the courage to drop the armor, to open the hands, to stop rehearsing old battles. It is the freedom to live again without needing the past to be rewritten. So the invitation is simple, though not easy. Look at where the chains are still clinging. Notice where the critic still speaks, where the grudge still burns, where the guilt still whispers. And ask, not with force, but with gentleness, what would happen if I set this down? Perhaps nothing changes on the outside. The past remains as it was. The people remain as they are. But inside, something subtle shifts. The silence after forgiveness arrives, and in that silence, he discovers the greatest freedom of all, the ability to live as if today were enough. Forgive yourself. Forgive the world, not because the past deserves it, but because the present does.